So these logs began to twist. The lengthways of them, they were flat on three sides. Well, they were flat on the inside. They were tongue and grooved on the top and bottom, and then they had an outside curve that looked like a log, and they would twist. They were 15, 20 feet long, and they would twist. And so when we began to try to put these logs together, you get them in the groove on one end, and the other end would be turned a third of the way. And so what we would do would be drill holes, and we used nails 10 inches long, 3/8 of an inch around, and we'd drive a nail, and then we made a forked tool that fit down over the log, and with about we had an extension on it where we could put about 10 foot of extension on it, and we get somebody on that log and begin to bend it down, straighten it down, and as that person was holding that, we'd drill another hole and drive and until we'd straighten that log completely up, and we'd have it nailed down, and we'd put another one, and we had volunteer people that came in to help us with this. We had a group out of Temple Baptist Church out at the Air Force Base in Rapid City. Dick Medford was their pastor, and Dick had been a missionary at Lame Deer among the Cheyenne, and I had met Dick when I was in Hammond, when he was missionary in Mississippi among the Choctaws. And I had gone down and worked with him, with his Choctaw people. And so Dick had invited us to a mission conference up in his church at Temple. And I had shared with the men as I was speaking, I said, if I had 2 men a day for 30 days, we could get those logs up to where we could be ready to put the rafters up and get this closed in before winter came. And I remember one of his laymen said, well, why don't we just give you 30 men for one day? And I said, other than the fact that we couldn't use that many. And so their church, most of them were Air Force people, but their church would send 2 or 3 men 3 or 4 days a week to come, and we put those logs up. And it was during this same time that Ernie Johnson was our treasurer, and I asked Ernie, we were getting up with our logs pretty well, and I said, Ernie, how much money have we got? And he said, well, we got about $300. And I said, well, we need to order about $7,000 worth of lumber. We can order it through a rancher out of Oregon, and when it gets here, we'll need to pay for it. But I feel like we need to get it because we're going to have winter come in on us, and we need to get a roof on this thing. And he said, well, if you feel like this is what God wants us to do, order it. So we ordered that lumber, and 3 weeks later when it came in, the day before it came in, I got a check for $7,000 from the Home Mission Board, and the director of the Home Mission Board had told me that if I would put a requisition in that they could that they might be able to help, and it was exactly $7,000, and we got it a couple of days before the wood lumber came in, and I'd been trying to get the fellow that worked at this housing thing to borrow a tool a time or two, and he just wouldn't help me out at all. And when this load of lumber come in, we had a whole semi-truckload of lumber that needed to be unloaded, and so I went down and talked to him, and I said, "Have you got a forklift?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I've got one that's free this morning." And I said, "Well, can we use it? Have you got anybody that can drive it? And can we use it?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, I've got a man that's not going to be working this morning. He could unload it for you." And I said, "Well, what's it going to cost?" And he said, "Well, it'll cost $20 for his labor. Would that be too much?" So for $20, we got that semi truck unloaded in 2 hours. And
that's amazing.
God just worked everything out, and that doctor's wife, she was always talking about, "Lord, Harold, you're going to get us in debt." And when we got the church building finished, it had cost $26,000, and we owed nothing. It was totally paid for. When we dedicated it, it was totally paid for. While we were working on that building, we had a missionary or preacher down at Cheyenne, Nebraska, and when I mention his name, you're gonna know him, and or at least know of him. You won't know him, but this again is how God works in working out His plan. Within a month of when Deloris and I moved into Pine Ridge, Lowell McElroy and his family moved into Cheyenne, Nebraska. He came in there as a missionary. He had 3 children. He later felt the Lord's call to become the pastor and start the work at Hot Springs, the Cascade Road Baptist Church. And Lowell brought up a group of boys from the Job Corps down south of Cheyenne to work on our church building. And there was, I never will forget, we were working up on the roof, and Lowell was working. Now the roof was about 8 foot from the ground, and he was facing down, working at the edge of where the vestibule and the regular roof come together, and he fell off head first. And I just knew that he'd fallen on the concrete step, a porch down there. And I stepped over there to look down and see how bad he was hurt. And he was looking up at me. He had fallen head first, flipped upside down, and lit on his feet. It was, you talk about the Lord taking care of people. And but he became a real dear friend, and he pastored at like I said, at Cascade Road Baptist Church for a number of years. It was during this time that he was at Cascade Road, which was actually First Baptist Church back during the early days, that he had opportunity to reach Steve Simpson and lead Steve Simpson to the Lord. It was during this time that we were having fantastic fishing at Pine Ridge at the White Clay. During the wintertime, we could go out any day about 9 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you were going to catch anywhere from 6 or 7 to 20 northern pike, and these pike were going to be 3.5 to 10 to 11 pounds, and you would catch them every day, day after day, day after day. And Lowell had come over several times and fished with me, and he kept telling me, he said, I've got a friend, a guy that's coming to our church that raises fish, and he said, I'd like to bring him. And talking to Steve later, Steve said, I was a new Christian, and he said I wasn't comfortable around preachers, and he said Lowell kept talking about catching all these northern pike, and that there was a missionary over there, and he said he's just a common old guy. And Steve said I had never met any common old preachers, and so Steve come over, and that first meeting, there was just something came together with Steve and I, and we have been friends now for over 30 years, and still fish together and still share. But we caught so many of those northern pike there for so many years. One time we caught 42 northern pike one day that were better than 3.5 pounds apiece. It just, but the Lord just continued to bless us in every area. This Henry Childs that I mentioned, that was director of missions. I get so tickled at Henry. He'd say, Harold, he said, we need to plan the work for Pine Ridge for another year. He says, how would along in January or February work out? And I said, well, that'd be fine. And Henry would come up, and we would spend our days out at White Clay Lake fishing, planning our work for another year. Man, there's so many plans that were made, and so much of the work's direction was done at times like this. When I talk about that, my hunting and fishing, and my activities with kids and so on and so forth, it all ties together. It all comes together. And this is what it's amazing to me, and yet it isn't. When we got our building up in, we were building it in 75, and we had a vacation Bible school at Kyle and at Sharp's Corner and at Manderson and at Pine Ridge. And at Wounded Knee. We were. I began to see that with the groups that could come and help us, that we could do Bible schools in these different villages, not where we could do work, but at least we could let them know who Southern Baptists were. And these groups that came, they got so involved with the people. There are workers, Vacation Bible School workers, that are still writing people back on the res and making contacts with them. And who knows the extent of the work? But people across the res began to know who Baptists were. And we just felt if we could just touch as many lives as we possibly could, and that's what we were doing with our Vacation Bible Schools. Not only were we working the Vacation Bible Schools, but along there in '75, our youth camps had gotten up 175. We had Dwayne Pratt, who was an Oklahoma Indian, came as a camp pastor in the year of '75. But we also had not only did we work through our Bible schools with youth groups, but we also used youth groups as counselors for these camps. Mm-hmm. And we had a fellow by the name of David Langerfeld that came from Tennessee. He was not a pastor, he was an educational director. He brought 13, 15 young people, college-age students, to be counselors in our youth camps. And David, his life is such a testimony. He came for, I don't know, he must have come for 10 years as leader with these, but he had such a sweet disposition, and God blessed him in so many ways. You remember the Faith Waits program that was done several years ago, where young people were to commit their lives to not having sex relationships. All right, David was in the forerunner of this on a national level. But the neat thing was the relationship between David and his wife Linda. David and Linda met when they were in college, and they felt drawn together, and they got married. And shortly after they got married, she was diagnosed with MS, and she today is a total invalid. She has been. Back in these days when David was bringing these groups, she was a total invalid. They had to be careful of turning her over, of breaking bones, and when they first got married, she was diagnosed with this. She and David had gotten together, and she told David, she said, "I do not want me in any way to hinder your work. I want you to go, I want you to do." And David has done this over the years. As he brought these youth groups, these college students to help us in our Indian youth camps. Linda was at home during this time, and when he got further into Southern Baptist leadership and working with the with this young people. He is nationally known in our Southern Baptist circles, and but he and Linda are still totally committed to the Lord, and they have lived with this, call it a handicap if you want to, but this thing that has drawn them so close to the Lord and close to one another. And this is the kind of people that God has made it possible for us to work with at Pine Ridge, and to bring this type of people into the lives of our Indian youth. And it was just such a blessing to have David work with us and these college students. And so we had there in 75, we had 175 kids, and a native pastor, Dwayne Pratt, was our camp pastor. The next year, we were able to, in 76, we were able to go to Indian Falls Creek. I began to take a group of our young people and some of our adults to Falls Creek, Indian Falls Creek in Oklahoma. And Indian Falls Creek is the largest Indian encampment in the world. And back in those days, it was running 12, 15, 1800. Now it runs over 3,000. And but I wanted. We used the Bible schools. We used the youth camps. I tried to use Falls Creek, whatever. Get our kids out of Pine Ridge and let them see what Southern Baptist people, what Indian Baptist people were doing in other parts of the world. And this was what was done through our youth camps. And that year in 76, we had 187, and it was in that year that we dedicated our new church building. And by the way, I didn't give you a size on that church building, but that church building was 96 feet long and 32 feet wide. And as I had mentioned earlier, when we dedicated it, it was totally paid for. There was an interesting aspect while we were working on that building. One day I had an Indian fella come in, and he said, "Harold," he said, I'm not here to cause trouble. He said, "We were just sitting in one of our offices, and we wondered, who gave you permission to build this church building?" And I said, we did it through, I told him one of the committees that we had worked with, and I said we did it through the Bureau. And he said, "Now, I'm not trying to give you any problem." He said, he said, "We're just curious." He said, Do you know what this piece of property is supposed to be used for in the building plan of?" He said, "This is supposed to be a park." And he said, "Some of us were just sitting around in an office and we wondered." And he said, "It's not a problem." He said, "It's great." But he said half of the building, half of the property that was to be a park is your building. The other half, the house you live in. And he said, of course, an Indian guy built that house. So he said, it's not a problem, but he said it wasn't in our building plan. And but there again, the Lord just in His way just worked this thing out.